Hi, Damon here for Automotive Superstore yet again, and this time around I'm going to show you how easy it is to install an amplifier that'll drive all your speakers in your car, including a subwoofer. So one of the first things to think about is how much power you're going to need spread across the speakers that you've got in your car. In this particular instance, I've just got a set of mid-range speakers and tweeters in the front of the car and a single subwoofer in the back. But a more traditional speaker setup would be front speakers, rear speakers, and maybe a subwoofer. When you go shopping for an amplifier for the main speakers in the system, you'll find that they'll start at about 50 watts RMS per channel into a 4 ohm load. Ignore looking at the 2 ohm load power ratings on amplifiers running your main speakers, because your main speakers aren't 2 ohms, so that's irrelevant. They're 4 ohm speakers. Stick to the 4 ohm power ratings. For a subwoofer amplifier, you'll find the mono models on our website start at about 300 watts RMS of maximum power into the lowest impedance they're designed to run, typically around 2 ohms. Make sure your subwoofer matches the impedance you're checking your power ratings at. So if you have an amplifier that's rated to make its best power at 2 ohms, try and ensure that your subwoofer presents a 2 ohm load to that amplifier. A lot of the time the choice between one multi-channel and 2 separate amplifiers comes down to ease of installation and ease of wiring. For example, a single 5-channel amplifier, all the wiring goes to one location in the car. Whereas oftentimes if you put a 4-channel under one seat, say, and a mono amp under the other seat, you've got 2 seats to pull out and 2 locations to run wiring to. That can get a bit messy. So when I went shopping, my requirements were I wanted at least 50 watts RMS by 4, maybe more for the main speakers, and I wanted at least 400 watts RMS by 1 into a 2 ohm load for my subwoofer. I also was a bit cheeky and said I want it to fit where my factory amplifier goes, so it's all hidden away, and I don't want it to be too heavy. Then I went shopping and I found Kenwood's XH901-5. It looked better than ideal even. So this one makes 60 watts RMS by 4 into 4 ohms and 500 watts by 1 into a 2 ohm load. It will also fit in the bracket in the location that I need it to. It just squeezes in there. Now the bonus is it weighs about 2.4 kilograms, which is less than the factory amplifier and a 400 watt mono amplifier put together. Sounds perfect. Also, it comes with a wired remote for the subwoofer level, and that means I can adjust the subwoofer level gain independent of the front and rear speakers anytime I want. Now I know most head units or all head units have that feature built in, but it's not easily accessible. And I like to turn the bass up and down as I go along, and I don't want to dig into menus in a touch screen. So a remote level controller for the mono channel is ideal. So now let's talk about wiring. A few things to consider there. So first of all is how much power is your amplifier going to be producing, and then how far away that amplifier is from the battery in the car. Now in my car the battery's in the back, and my amplifier is probably going to be making about 600 or 700 watts at best at any given time, so I can get away with a smaller, lighter, more affordable 8-gauge wiring kit for my particular project. I'm using this Max Core one from AirPro. However, most cars, the battery's in the front, and the distance to your amplifier might be 5 or 6 meters. If you've got an amplifier that's going to make over 500 or 600 watts RMS, seriously consider running larger gauge wire than 8 gauge. You're probably going to need a 4-gauge wiring kit. Now before I actually jump into the installation itself, I'll whip up a quick diagram to show you how the normal wiring will go through most cars. So here we have the amplifier, the head unit, and the battery that I've put at the front of the car because yours is probably at the front of the car. You'll have the main power wire coming off the positive terminal of the battery going to a fuse. That needs to be within 30 centimeters, this one here, 30 centimeters of the positive terminal on the battery. The fuse's job is to protect the car, not the sound system. So, once that runs through the firewall, that'll have to run through a rubber grommet in your firewall to protect the cable. It then runs to the positive input on the amplifier itself. Then there's the earth cable that comes out and goes to chassis earth near to the amplifier. There's no need to run an earth cable all the way back to the earth of the battery because the chassis does a perfectly good job of that by itself. Then there's the trigger wire that runs from the head unit to the amplifier. Its job is to turn the amplifier on and off when the head unit turns on and off. You'll also have 1, 2, or maybe even 3 sets of RCA cables, and these are stereo cables that transmit the music signal from the head unit to the amplifier. You'll need 1 pair of those for each pair of channels. If you have a remote level controller like I'm using, you'll have the cable for that that's going to need to go from the amplifier to wherever you put that remote in your dashboard somewhere. finally, there's the speaker wire that's going to go to each pair of speakers and your subwoofer. Now, you'll need something to go from the amp to the subwoofer for sure. You don't necessarily need to run this to every speaker in the system directly, and sometimes you might find that if you run 4 pairs of these from the amplifier back to the head unit when you're running your RCAs and trigger, the easiest place to access the factory wiring is to get behind the head unit and access it, because it'll go to all those speakers in any case. So the first task you'll take care of is to remove the trim panels between your head unit and where the amplifier is going to go. Of course, that starts with the removal of the head unit itself. In my case, because I was going across to the passenger side, I removed the glove box lid. This is the side panel on the side of the dashboard. This is the side panel going down where the center console goes, because I'm going to be running some cables there. This is where the scuff plate goes along the side of the car, and the kick panel. And then I'll pull the carpet back so I can run all the cables down through. The tools you'll need for that is going to be things like Torx bits and Allen keys, a socket set. Some trim removal tools like these are very handy. These are available on our website. An assortment of screwdrivers, maybe some side cutters, and I've got some cable ties so I can tie the cable up as I go along to keep it nice and secure. Then I have the main cable I'm going to run from the head unit to the amplifier. That's my 3 RCAs, of course, that at each end I'll put some masking tape and put front, rear, and subwoofer on, so I don't have to guess which is which once I'm actually wiring everything up. There's of course a trigger lead to turn the amp on and off, and the remote level controller cable. I've cable tied that together every 30 centimeters to keep that nice and neat. And I've also got my power cable here that's going to go from my battery to the amplifier, but my battery's in the back of the car, so that's going to be nice and short. Now here's an extra tip: if you're going to run your power cable all the way from the battery to the back of the car, run it down one side of the car and run your RCAs down the other side. It not only makes wiring a little bit neater, but also it's a good way of avoiding some interference that can happen. Other than that, try and use quality twisted pair cables like these Air Pro ones. So here's the wiring run from where the head unit is, down the side of the trans tunnel, behind the factory thick insulation, and then down under the insulation along the sill. Here we are, just ready to plug the head unit all back together. Here's the blue trigger lead coming off the blue wire out of the back of the loom from my source unit. And here are our leads ready to plug in. Here we have our fuse. I've mounted that very close to where the positive terminal is going to be here. I have not connected the power wire yet. So what I've done is I've gone through the wiring and I've determined which ones are right hand front door mid and left hand front door mid there, right and left, and then the tweeter left and right connections there that are running to my speakers in the front of the car, and they're all just being connected across to the amplifier. Choosing your earth point, oftentimes you'll find a factory position like this one here that's actually right next to where I'm mounting the amplifier. Nice and handy. It's a nice sturdy bolt that will accept an 8-gauge terminal ring, and it's already exposed to the chassis of the car, so just put the ring on. If you are going to create your own earthing point, the important thing is that the ring terminal is connected to the bare chassis of the car, and you may need to sand back that area, connect the ring terminal to the chassis, and then put a touch of paint over the top of it so it doesn't corrode. So we're ready to wire up now. Let's just have a quick talk about the order in which you connect the wires in the safest manner. Now, speaker connections can be done at any time, and when you're dealing with a multi-channel amplifier, this is the unwieldy part, trying to muck around with these, and if you've got power and earth connected while you're doing that, it can be a bit difficult to maneuver the amplifier around. So you can connect the speaker wires whenever you like. This pertains to RCAs, power, earth, and trigger. So, very first thing to connect is the ground. That way, if you accidentally power the amp up without the ground connected, it's not going to try and find it down the RCA connection, for example, which could be bad news. Connect the trigger. Just double checking the head unit on the car is off. Now the battery is disconnected at this point, so there's not going to be any zaps or pops. Now you can safely connect power. And Now we connect our RCAs. And we are all connected. Now we can connect the positive to the battery. So now the amplifier is all wired up, it's time to set our input sensitivity levels and other controls on the amplifier. Here's the Kenwood amplifier blown up on the screen, showing you all the dials and all the numbers that may confuse you. Let me dispel that for you right now. The most important one to think about is the input sensitivity levels. Here is a dial for each of the front, rear and subwoofer input channels. Important to know, this is not a volume level for your amplifier. Your amplifier makes the amount of power that it makes as long as you give it enough input signal. The input sensitivity level's job is to make sure that you get all of the power you paid for, regardless of what kind of input signal you've got. Let me take you back in time and show you why that matters. So this is a little chart here. I'm going to take us back to 1998 when I used to work at Hot Force magazine doing all the car audio reviewing. I would routinely measure modern, expensive aftermarket head units to make only as little as 0.2 of a volt of AC voltage out of their RCA pre-outs. Fast forward 25 years, and even the entry-level CarPlay head unit from Kenwood, the DMX 5022, makes 2 volts, 10 times that much. And that's just their entry-level model now. If you step up just one model from that to the 7022S, it's now 5 volts RMS out of each pair of RCA pre-outs. You can see here this little waveform represents the size. The much larger signal has a much better chance of reducing induced noise. It has little to do with sound quality and all to do about just avoiding noise. What does it mean regarding your input sensitivity dial? Well, here's a diagram blown up of the ones that you'll find on the Kenwood or most any other amplifier. At the minimum, we've got a 5, and that counts down 4, 3, 2, 1, then 0.5, 0.3, and 0.2 at maximum. What do you reckon that refers to? So yes, 5 is indicative of, if you've got a 5 volt strength head unit, your input sensitivity level for your channels is going to be down near here. If it's around 2 volts, it's going to be up around here. And if you've got a really old head unit, and I don't know why you'd have one these days, but if you do, it's going to be right around here near the maximum setting. It's where you're probably going to start and probably close to where you're going to end up with each of your input sensitivity levels. Now you understand why it's a dial and what that means. So now let's talk about crossovers, the next most important thing for you to set on your amplifier. What are they first? Well, a crossover is 2 intersecting filters. We need filters to make sure that our speakers are playing in the correct band of frequencies they're designed to play. In this traditional system where you've got front and rear speakers and a subwoofer, you want the subwoofer just to play bass, and you want your front speakers just to play everything but bass. And that's what these crossover filters do. If we have a close look at the ones on the Kenwood amplifier, you've got the sub-level crossover, which is an LPF, low pass filter, and then A and B stereo channels for your front and rear speakers. It's an HPF, high pass filter. In graphical form, it looks like this. So if this is the entire audible spectrum from 20 Hertz to 20K, so 20 Hertz being extremely low, just the very lowest we can hear, through to 20,000 Hertz, the very highest frequencies we can hear. Your tweeters play up here, your mid-range speakers play in here, and your subwoofer plays down here. If you look at a close-up of the dials on a traditional amplifier like the Kenwood, you'll see that it has a low-pass filter. You can set it at 50 all the way around to 200, and no coincidence, the high-pass filter can also be set from 50 all the way around to 100. What it means is when I turn the dial on the subwoofer low-pass filter and I set it to 80 Hertz, at 80 Hertz, you'll actually pull out all of the sound above that, and the subwoofer will only play frequencies below 80 Hertz and the output will diminish above that. The high pass filter works exactly the same in the opposite way, and that if I set it at 80 Hertz, it will diminish the frequencies below 80 Hertz and just keep the speakers playing the frequencies they need to play. In a traditional system like this where you've got a subwoofer and front and rear speakers, subwoofer low pass filter is going to sound best somewhere between 70 and 90 Hertz somewhere. Your front speakers and your rear speakers, that's a bit different. It really depends on what size speakers they are. If they're nice and large, like they're a 6.5 inch or larger, you might find that they'll sound great playing all the way down to that same frequency, down near 60 or 70 hertz. If they're smaller, they're a 5.25, they're a 4-inch speaker, you may need to adjust your high pass filter to 150, maybe even 200 to get them to play nice and loud without distortion. That's what the crossover dials are for. That's what a crossover is. All right, on the home stretch now, I've put the subwoofer back in, connected it up, amplifier's tucked away, wiring's all neat and cable tied in place. So it's time to fire it up and have the first listen, and then we can do some more level adjustment. So jumping in, you can see I've still left the head unit hanging out a little bit just in case something happens and I want to adjust RCAs or check a connection before I put everything back together again. Down here's my little sub-level remote control that nicely hides behind this door. Don't need an ashtray anyway anymore. Let's give it a quick listen. And some bass. Okay, so that's a reasonable start to the tuning. What I'll probably do now is I'm going to go for a drive and have a listen to it at Damon's normal playing volume, and then I can go in and adjust the input sensitivity levels. Here's the trick. Setting your input sensitivities precisely with an oscilloscope technically is the right way to do it. First of all, no one has an oscilloscope. Second of all, that doesn't really cater for varying recording levels. So if you listen to an old Led Zeppelin or an old Beatles album compared to a very modern new recording, the hotness of the recording is vastly different between those two things. So if you set them with a modern recording, when you put an old recording in, you'll have no volume output. And so you need to set your levels to cater for that. And so they tend to be a little bit hotter on the input sensitivity side than is technically correct, and just need to be mindful of that when you're listening. So after having a bit of a drive around, you can go in and just tweak those levels as required, maybe give it a little bit of a tickle of bass boost sparingly, no more than about 3 dBs advisable. One other thing to keep in mind is you don't really want to use the volume control of your source unit above around 70 to 80% of its max volume scale. And so I would set my loud listening level with a quiet recording with my head unit volume at about 70 or 80%, and then I would go through and just trim these input sensitivity levels again, just to make sure you're getting the type of volume you're after with that recording. So there you go, your amplifier's all installed, tuned and ready to go. I hope you enjoyed this DIY, and down below you'll find some links to other DIYs I've done that you might find helpful about subwoofer boxes, head units and speakers and things like that. While you're down there, like and subscribe and maybe leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.